Hello and welcome to this SlimDevOps episode 27. It's nearly Christmas. Welcome back. This episode was recorded on twitch.tv/SlimDevOps on the 2nd of December. If you're watching this after the fact on YouTube then, and you want to join in interactively, then please head to twitch.tv/SlimDevOps and give us a follow. We'll look forward to your participation and questions. So, hello, I'm joined by Pieter and Ellen this week. Hey Pieter, how you doing?
Hey, great, Martin. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And Ellen, hello. Would you just like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm an advisor at Slim.AI, as well as being a founder in residence at Boldstart Ventures, one of the investors in Slim. And before this, I founded a company called Dark, which made a programming language designed for building backend web services.
Super cool.
Cool.
Very cool. So yeah, excited to have Ellen here with us today. But Martin, what were you guys up to last week on the stream? I saw you and Big Pod were doing some sort of GUI app in a container. How'd that go?
Yeah, surprisingly well. That was another one of these ad hoc, let's try something different. It came from a question from the community. So Yannick had said, can he put graphical applications in a Docker container? And I just said, well, yes, of course you can, because I knew in principle it was doable. And then Big Pod and I decided, well, let's make that a topic for the stream, Big Pod being another member of our community. So Big Pod went through, took the reins. I was just stream operator for the day, and he went through the process of running Firefox in a Docker container, and we sort of hit the essential points on how you would do that. And then we threw out we had a rather rough solution, but nevertheless a working solution. And then we threw out a challenge to the community to come back with a refined version of what we'd created. And so I reached for my brand new Slim beanie, and I said, anyone who can improve the mess that we've just made will get one of these. So Danny came up with a very elegant solution to wrap it all up into a rather neat piece, and then also Phil from the community moved it over to Docker Compose, which also had a number of benefits. So we all learned something. So those follow-on conversations, they happened in our Discord. So above my head you can see the URL, and at the bottom of that page you'll find links to our GitHub and what have you, and also our Discord. And we had several days of backwards and forwards of improving on this improvised container that we made.
Oh, well, that's great. And Ellen, the beanies are available to Slim advisors, so if you haven't gotten yours yet, let's make sure we get you one. It's getting cold here.
I will wear it. It's cold out.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, cool. Well, we're excited to have Ellen here today. Ellen, you have a really, really cool background. I always learn so much when we get to chat. So maybe for people who haven't heard it, tell us a little bit about sort of, you were talking about Dark and the programming language that you founded, and sort of how you came to your current role. Maybe talk us through your background a little bit and tell us what you're doing these days.
Sure. Yeah, I guess like many people who care about ops, I was an engineer by training originally. I went to a brand new engineering school out in Needham, Mass, where the whole idea was how can we change how we educate engineers to help them think holistically about products. I would say it didn't result in me being the best technical contributor ever, but one thing I did end up with was a pretty holistic perspective on what we were building and why, which took me into a career in product management, mostly on products that help other people build things. I think that pretty generally, I worked on Microsoft Office. I still like Office productivity tools. And then I worked on Kickstarter, which is about helping people get capital to build things. And so you can kind of see how that ties into doing venture now. And then I actually ended up as an EIR once before at an incubator called Blade. And the project that I was working on originally ended up becoming a company called Lola, which was recently acquired by Capital One. And it was in the travel space. And working on something that wasn't a tool to help people make things was what made me realize I wanted to get back to that. And so then when I met my co-founder, Paul Bigger, who had previously co-founded Circle.CI, we started working on the approach of what could you do to a programming language to make it radically better such that many more people could be building applications as well.
Mm-hmm. And that seems like such a daunting challenge to take on, just like inventing a programming language and then building a company around it. Like, talk us through that process, that decision. Like, what was that like, sort of staring at a blank page almost, in a way of, we're going to start this new programming language and go from there?
Yeah, I love that part of company building. I think it's one of the most fun times, but I feel like there's like two types of people who like love that, thrive on it, and then like it less and less the bigger the company gets. And then people who would much rather come in and help work on a system where there's somewhat of a defined process or at least a defined challenge to be done. In the very early days of Dark, the first iterations of it, we actually just drew pictures of what we thought completed programs would look like. And so we would look at like applications we'd built before and look at the code we'd written and been like, okay, in our ideal world, what would this look like? And we would just draw them out on the whiteboard. Cool. A really common one we had, I'm pretty introverted. And so for a while I had a battery application and it would text me once a day to say, do you feel better or worse than yesterday?
Oh, wow.
And so I'd like built it in Rails originally, and we kind of went through and said, okay, what would the best version of the battery application be? We did it like for Instagram and Twitter and other common social applications. We thought about it from the perspective of SaaS applications. And once we had some of those core concepts down, we started actually implementing. And when we implemented, we would always do like the minimum possible thing. So we'd be able to test it. So I think first programs we wrote, there weren't even conditionals in the language yet. And so all you could do was basically solve a Caesar cipher. So like take an encoded string and translate it however many characters forwards or backwards, and then decode our secret message, which was usually Ellen and Paul's new startup. And then each time we would learn something each time we made a version like that, and then kind of go to the next layer of it. It's much less daunting if you're making a programming language for one problem rather than a programming language that can do anything.
Oh, that's really cool. It's like the same approach that you can take to companies, right? I mean, building MVPs and testing and iterating, talking to users and that's kind of what you're doing now at Boldstart, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your current role and what you're doing? What does the day-to-day look like and how you're enjoying it?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role at Boldstart is intentionally ambiguous. So I get to do a bunch of different things, and it's been great to be able to do that with Ed and Elliot and Shomik and the rest of the team. So one chunk of that is investing work. Talking to new companies, seeing how they're thinking about building things out, and if that might be a fit for our model. In particular, at Boldstart, almost all of our companies have technical founders. Many of them are developer tooling and infrastructure. Some of them are other enterprise-focused products, but because we only do 20 per fund and we're so tightly focused on that, we end up getting to see the same thing in practice, the same motion a lot, which is nice. Then the other part of my role is once we've invested in companies like Slim, I'm able to spend time with the teams. So I went through it, I think an early blog post that John wrote at the very beginning and tried it as a user and then sent him a video of me using Slim based on the getting started guide so you could see a real reaction. So support like that, joining you, thank you for having me today, is part of it as well.
I'm sure that blog post was just perfect and, incredible, given that those are some of my things. No, we've come a long way.
It was good.
Yeah. Well, good. That's good to hear. Yeah. But it's been quite a ride, and it's been cool, getting to check in with you and hear what the other companies at Boldstart are doing. And you always give great advice about, product development, talking to developers and all that kind of thing. So we just really appreciate the time that you spend with us and all the feedback that you give. So, I wanted to ask you about, so you're just coming back from Tel Aviv. You were at DevOps Days in Tel Aviv, where you gave a talk on the future of DevOps. And I definitely want to dive into that. My first question, though, since we both kind of come from travel product backgrounds, is did you get to spend much time in Tel Aviv? Did you get out? I've heard incredible things about the city. I've never been there. I'm curious your take on Tel Aviv.
Yeah, it was great. You should definitely. It's challenging. I think the borders are closed again right now, unfortunately. But if you have a chance, you should definitely go. I was able to stay kind of in the southern part of downtown. And so it's obviously known for the beaches and for the Jaffa part of the city. So I got to walk around there a bunch. And then I was also able to walk through some of the markets on my way to visit the Big ID office, another Boldstart portfolio company. And I got to do that art museum, which was really nice. It's a really great modern art collection as well.
Awesome. Oh, that sounds super cool. Yeah, we've got to do a trip over there. I know we have a lot of connections over there, so that's on our list once COVID lifts a little bit. But tell us about the talk. So, Future of DevOps, you got I saw a lot of chatter about it on Twitter. It seems like people were pretty fired up about the idea. What were some of the high level points that you were exploring, and sort of like what was your thought process as you were developing the talk, and why was it important now?
Yeah. So as I was developing the talk, the first thing I was thinking about is I think of the origins of DevOps as a movement as going back to 2009, both with the first DevOps days and then also with the talk that John Alspaugh and Paul Hammond gave at Velocity that year. And I can do math, and so I know it's actually been 12 years, but when I was thinking about COVID and the fact that we hadn't had many DevOps Days events, I was kind of like, we're about the midpoint. And if we say we're thinking about the next 10 years, that gives us enough leeway to go like, wow, what was it like 10 years ago? How do we compare to that? And if we think about a similar delta going forwards, how far would that be? Sorry about the vacuum cleaner noises if you can hear them.
That's all right. You can send her over to my place when she's done, because I can use some.
We got a Christmas tree today and it dropped needles all over, so I think it's worse than usual. Nice. So wanted to situate in the middle of time. And then since I worked on Dark before this, one of the things that was interesting about Dark was we considered it to be a programming language where infrastructure was batteries included. And we said no application developer should have to think about ops at all. It should just come out of the box. You write code. It's already hosted as a web service that you're able to use. Which was really cool and interesting. But I think for a lot of people, it was a bit too far out there, too much of an adjustment. And for some people who really enjoy ops, it was kind of taking away a lot of the fun part of what people were building. And so I wanted to think about like, that was one answer to that question, but I assumed there were also others that were available as well. And I wanted to think through some of the themes that we will continue to see come up over the next 10 years.
And so what were some of those points? So infrastructure is one. Like, what else should DevOps teams be thinking about these days?
Yeah. So I think the first one that's really important to me is I think we're seeing a lot more real-time feedback loops. And when I say real-time feedback loops, what I mean is if anyone watching has kids, they often learn programming through a tool like Scratch or like the Logo Turtle or Lego Mindstorms. And so you do something and you immediately see the results. And historically, we didn't really give ourselves the same advantages of as professionals. So you can imagine the world of like, you write a bunch of stuff and then you hope it compiles. And then it probably doesn't. And then you have to kind of like dig around and try to figure out what went wrong. And so I think all of our tooling will have more of that immediate responsiveness, which helps us learn. And I see that across the board. We see it in languages. We see it in editors. We see it, Zeplo is an API gateway tool. And you can see how they show if your route is working or is configured as you expected as soon as you do it. Snaplet is a tool that makes it easier for developers to work with real data in their database. And so that has a similar thing. The work you're doing with Slim around the diffs, so you can see exactly what changed in the container from version to version, also very much fits into that. So I think that's one thing where developers will start to expect that immediate feedback as they're building rather than being willing to like bang their head against the wall.
I think you make a good point about Scratch there. So my daughter's been learning programming through Scratch initially, and actually as a result of lockdown, that was a course that was provided remotely to get junior school children into programming, and it very much is that sort of immediate feedback of what you're doing and see the effect of what you're doing as you're doing it that I think compels her and has driven her, and she's really engaged with it. And I think, to your point, there's a generation behind us who are going to come through, and that is going to have been their experience of getting started with development and an expectation of how they want to develop as they move forward. Particularly when you look at where you go from Scratch to MicroPython and the way that works in a very similar and immediate way.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, I will share this in Discord with the chat. I have done one Scratch application. I did it as part of my CS50X. It is called Snow Days. It is basically a snow shoveling video game. You cannot beat the game because the levels just get harder and you eventually get buried in snow. And I've been told it's the most frustrating game that people who played it have ever played in their life. So I will share that in Discord for people who are going to join our Discord. And people can play it and tell me if they think it's frustrating or not. But Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I've actually been learning Rust recently, and Rust's compiler is incredibly verbose. It like tells you so much about what's going on with your code, and it's just such a far cry from the early days of C compilers. Even Python, like when you're running things in Python, you don't always know. You have to put your own breakpoints in and stuff. Rust pretty much tells you if it thinks you've written a good program or not. And my programming not good, but it is real-time feedback.
So,
but I think that's the thing. Your programming will get better with all of that real-time feedback.
Yeah.
So Esme makes the point that Flutter is a great contemporary example of a development environment language framework where they have that hot reloading baked in, and you can immediately see the effect of your changes on your application. From deep and complex to superficial UI changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people who haven't watched French guys streams about Flutter can check that out. Usually streams right after we do here, so definitely check that out. Ellen, I'm curious. So you mentioned kind of 4 points. So that was the first one. What was the next up?
So I think the other one we'll see is, I think in the last 10 years, it was actually, when I think about what I was doing 10 years ago, that was when I was working on Microsoft Office in a box. And so you basically got to deploy once every 3 years. Whereas today, I would say many of us get to deploy once an hour, which is 27,000 times faster. And we put a lot into building microservices and CI/CD pipelines to make us able to do that. But I think the other half of that process, so that helps us ship faster. The other thing we talk about a lot is reducing risk for those changes. And I don't think we have nearly as much tooling for what happens after you've shipped if there is an incident. And I think the second theme is we're going to see a proliferation of tools across the spectrum, from things that help you get paged less often, things that improve who is getting paged, things that improve how we work together once we've been paged and we're trying to work on the incident, and things that we use to make sense of what has happened after the incident, disseminate the information to the organization. And so we'll see a lot of tools across those 4 stages of incident response.
Yeah, no, I can definitely plus one that one. I'll say when we were at TripAdvisor and we were switching to kind of a microservices environment, there's so many advantages: deploying faster, being able to build apps better, do more features, but the downside of that was you'd run into like timeout issues, and it was impossible to figure out, like if a microservice, it was really like some manual setting that we would put about this should time out at this certain set of milliseconds, and figuring that out was incredibly difficult because you would get these intermittent failures and you didn't know where they were coming from. So tools like Null9 and slows and Akita and sort of API observability and stuff like that, I think are going to be incredibly important. I think you're right on there. So the faster you can get to incidents, the better. And then for Slim, we kind of believe in pushing all of that left and triaging those issues early in the program, in the process, right? Developers at their desk should be sort of building in containers, figuring out if their container is going to make it all the way to production, and ship only what they need in those containers, so that it reduces the risk that something is there that's breaking breaking change. Yeah, interesting. Cool. I think you're right on. I think you're right on there. What was the next point in the talk?
Yes. The third one is sort of related to the first one, but I think the tools that get adopted will be the ones that keep developer experience in mind. And in particular, I think our mental model of developer experience will shift to be more based on a good developer experience is being and staying in flow. And we'll think a lot about how we can help developers stay in flow while using our tooling.
Yeah, definitely. Were you the one I think you were the one that turned me on to Flow State? Is that right?
The Flow Club.
Flow Club. That's what it is. Flow State.
I have my Flow Club water bottle here as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, Flow Club is really cool. For people who haven't checked out Flow Club, I turned into a bit of an addict with it. I ended up, having some meetings more recently, so I haven't been able to get in as much. But it's a dedicated hour on your calendar where you join other people, random strangers that you don't know, effectively on the equivalent of a Zoom call. But they have sort of and you play music and you say what you're going to focus on, and then you do that for an hour. And then you come back and everybody shares if they were successful or not. And I found it really helpful writing blog posts, doing email campaigns, stuff like that, if you have a task to do. I think that's really cool. How did you get involved with Flow Club? I'm curious.
Yeah, I angel invested in Flow Club because I've
Nice.
been friends with, I feel like technology careers are so long. I met Ricky
Yeah.
and David, the founders, at an entrepreneurship conference while we were all undergrads. And like we've stayed in touch and been friends since then. And so when they were starting this, I was an early user and I just loved it. And they let me get more involved.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I think they're definitely onto something. It's cool. And I've seen they have like meetups in New York City now. And that was kind of the missing piece for me. I was like, I want to network with all these people that I'm on Flow Club with. And now they're starting to do that, which is really cool. So
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, I think a big part, if you're not familiar with flow already as a concept for anyone listening, it's the idea that you always want your skills to match the level of challenge that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're making these tools, you want to think about how it can be easy enough for someone who's a novice. Like if you're new to the container world, you should probably still be able to use Slim, and you'll need a different experience than someone who's coming in who's been using containers for a long time and is an infrastructure expert. And I think you've done a great job with this stream of kind of having weeks that make sense for both of those sets of people as well.
Yeah, that's definitely something Martin and I have been trying to focus on, and the community honestly has like really helped us with, because I think when we first started, we kind of jumped right into container slimming and see everything that's in your container, and people were kind of like, well, hold on, like let's start with how would you start a container and how would you put your app in a container, and so that's been really good. I think for people who have tried our early access, they still see that we have some room to grow at Slim, where, it's still kind of an expert level tool and you can get in and see exactly what's in your container, but we're working on ways to give those insights that make them better. So if people haven't tried the early access, please go to Slim.AI and you can sign in immediately there. And we'd love your feedback on the platform. But yeah, that's where we're trying to get to is, make it kind of a quick start and make it easy to understand containers from the get-go. And for people who are experts and know how to do this stuff, like Danny, like some of the other people that we have in chat, provide a really, really robust tool that can allow them to deep dive. I've seen it, Ellen, I'm kind of curious on this. This is a bit of an aside, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. I saw a pretty interesting debate on Twitter with Jean Yang from Akita Software, and she had brought up this blog post about, developer tools kind of do one of two things. They either allow experts to kind of dive deeply, or they sort of increase the amount of abstraction and make it easier for people. Do you think that's valid? How do you think about that when thinking about dev tools?
Big Scratch day today. So the Scratch team is part of a group at MIT called Lifelong Kindergarten, I believe. And they have an analogy very much like this that I love, which is tools should either lower the floor and make it easier for people to be able to do something, widen the walls, which is broaden the set of use cases that are applicable for the tool, or raise the ceiling, which is enable people to do something they haven't been able to do before. I do think it's good to have a sense of which of those you're optimizing for first. And it sounds like with Slim, you have a great start of we built something that makes sense for container experts. And as you start to get that experience right and you have that moving, it then becomes applicable to tackle some of the other challenges. But yeah, I think I agree with Jean's overall premise for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, that's a really good way of looking at it. I didn't realize we were going to get so deep into Scratch, but I love Scratch. So, great. Maybe we'll do maybe that can be our holiday party, Martin. We can do a Scratch.
I've got a game in the works in Scratch, so yeah, maybe.
Okay, there you go. Perfect. I love it. Okay, so we got so real-time feedback, better insight into incidents, focus on the developer experience. What was the last point in the talk?
So the fourth one's kind of cheating a little bit, but I think we have a lot of metrics we think about as infrastructure people, like mean time to deploy or mean time to recover after an incident. And I think most business people aren't going to understand what the impact of those things are in the business. I think it's too far outside of the worldview you have when you're thinking about we need to fundraise, or we're optimizing for this revenue number, or we need to hire so many people. And so I think as infrastructure teams in the next 10 years, we're going to get better at talking about our work in language that's more approachable, and particularly numbers that are more approachable for other stakeholders within the business.
This sort of idea that I don't know, Marty Broadbeck, we had him on Twitch previously, and he makes a really good link between sort of operational capabilities and throughput, and actually like how many A/B tests you can run, and that leads to business outcome. And so sometimes when you're talking to business leaders or product managers or whatever, they understand these sort of business line metrics. They might not understand the operational metrics, but actually they're incredibly linked.
Right, exactly. It's much easier too if you understand how deployment works. Go, oh, this will help you run more A/B tests and get that person to care right away, as opposed to saying we'll deploy faster and have them be like, okay, so what? it kind of puts you in a different selling position.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. That's super interesting. So kind of taking the DevOps metrics and making them more business metrics and getting people to care about them. That's interesting. Yeah. So,
and I think that's what'll get us more resources for our infrastructure team, which will drive better business outcomes.
Yeah. No, I think that's super interesting. Well, I think another point that is relevant to us at Slim, right, is that we're sort of in this position where we think that, companies will never have as many kind of DevOps or SRE people that they might need to support the number of, application developers and feature engineers that are going to work, which, means that infrastructure and ops is going to move further to the left, and developers are going to have to do that work, but you can't just pile work on developers to do that. So I'm curious, like, what your take on that concept and sort of the need for automation and tooling specifically for developers to do infrastructure is, and how do you see that evolving in the light of DevOps getting more mature?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to what we did with Dark as well. I think that we'll continue to have to keep moving left. And I think the key is, how do you have that experience fit within what someone's doing? Like, we can't just say developers have to do more and more and more jobs as part of their jobs. We have to do the job as infrastructure teams to make it really simple for developers to adopt and do something. It goes to the DevX part too. You want to have something a developer doesn't like today and then deliver a tool that enables them to fix it that they want to use. I don't think it's ever going to work if we try to dictate you have to use this tool.
Yeah, it kind of grows organically. Yeah, exactly right. Well, awesome. And I'm curious, so what if, so you're an advisor at Slim. You've been working with us for a bit on containers. Our community here are a bunch of container enthusiasts, people who really love Ubuntu and Linux, and we're kind of learning containers. I'm wondering what, as you're thinking about sort of DevOps and how it's changing, like, what advice do you have for our community here at Slim that's thinking about containers? What advice do you have for us as a company at Slim as we're building this community? Just kind of curious how you're thinking about where we are at Slim right now.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that's really interesting about containers is kind of going to what you were saying before. It's something that enables you to have an experience that is much closer to production while you are developing. And I think, like, we cannot underestimate how important that is. I sort of think of it as code doesn't really matter except in the context it runs in. Like, I used to think, like, we used to, maybe not everyone, but I used to feel like the lines of code you wrote were the thing that mattered. And now I feel like the execution in the environment and with whatever data you have available is actually what matters. And I think containers get us much closer to that world.
Oh, that's an interesting concept. So it's sort of like the application is one part of it, but the ecosystem that surrounds it, which includes the container and the operating system, the data APIs that are going to be feeding data into that, is interesting. I hadn't been thinking about it that way. I think it's something I always felt as a product manager, was when I would see designs or I would see an early proof of concepts, like, they never survive first contact with, like, real data, and that was always such a challenging thing, and be like these beautiful mock-ups, and you'd be like, wait, this data doesn't look anything like this. And containers do allow us to get closer to that, because we can kind of mock up the production environment in a local environment a lot easier.
I feel like, coming from travel, that always happens with travel, where, like, the photographs aren't quite what you would desire, or, like, they're not as high resolution, or you want to, like, highlight these special facts about each hotel, but it turns out the API does not have those special facts.
Yeah, nothing like a vertical to a portrait, or a landscape to a portrait, change to throw off your entire design. So, yeah, totally true. So, Martin, any questions for Ellen on your side?
I've asked what came along. Esme was having some nostalgia for CS50 when you brought that up earlier. Joey says he thinks BASIC should still be everyone's first language. I'm not so sure. I've been very impressed with the journey with Scratch that my daughter's been on, and also how it introduces those sort of fundamental concepts in an accessible way that transpose directly to your next step in the programming there. So yeah, and I think and John points out that he thinks that this immediate feedback on development is far better than those of us that had to sit through object orientated Pascal back in the day.
Can't say I have any
Doing
experience
better.
with that. Yeah,
It's not there yet.
Yeah, well, I remember those days. I still have a fondness for Pascal. That was the first, in air quotes, proper computer language that I learned. I learned BASIC, I'd learned assembly, and then Pascal was like my first language that was fast to develop in. So I have a lot of fondness for that.
Yeah, okay. What about you, Ellen? What was your first programming language that you ever learned?
Perl.
Perl. Wonderful.
Wow.
Lots of love for Perl.
That's
My dad
hard
would still
mode right
insist that
there.
we should just write everything in Perl. He is very much a Perl person.
Nice. My dad likes talking about Fortran at University of Michigan in the 1960s. I don't even know what mine was. I think mine was actually C++, which is a little weird. I caught it a little bit later in like middle school, but we had a Commodore 64, but I can't say that I programmed anything in that or per se. I just played a lot of games. But
My mom talks a lot about programming on punch cards. That was her first.
Yeah.
Yes. Number your punch cards. That's my dad's advice on computers. So.
I joined an organization in the UK who were sort of IBM's mainframe competitor. And so I actually worked with mainframes and paper tape and punch cards in my first job. You get a lot of paper cuts, it turns out.
Who knew being a computer programmer is so dangerous?
And also, speaking of computer languages, you've been learning a new language recently, Peter.
Yeah. So as I was saying, I've been learning Rust, and that's been it's been kind of fun. I have been coming up with a few proof of concepts and stuff like that. And yeah, I think in office hours tomorrow on the Discord, I am planning to containerize, do a first Rust container, and try to slim that. So it's kind of a new and interesting thing for me in that I haven't worked with compiled languages a ton, and containerizing them brings up some new challenges, but there's a great Rust container base image that we can play around with. And so we'll try that in the Discord tomorrow. And if people are interested in seeing Rust, or if I have a few Rust experts in the community who want to come help out, that would be great. And we'll give that a try. So kind of to what Ellen was saying before, one thing I've been enjoying is actually using the Rust container as sort of my development environment, so I don't have to worry as much about requirements and stuff like that. It's pretty easy to set up a Rust environment locally, but it's also nice to have the container there and be able to jump in that and know that you have the compiler where you need it and all that kind of stuff. So living that life a bit.
Have either of you been doing Advent of Code?
No, I've seen people doing it, and I wanted to get into it, but I was like, I'm like learning Rust and I'm doing really good. I do my 45 minutes every morning as like my wake up thing with my coffee. And I'm like, if I take on one other coding challenge, I'm going to be up late. And Martin's been up late doing retro gaming for his latest open source project. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm making an operating system for the Raspberry Pi to play retro games from consoles from the past and arcade machines. So the emulators have been around for ages, but trying to make a console experience that you would expect to see on a modern games console, rather than an expert. It's a bit like what Ellen was saying, rather than an expert level bit of software that you put on a Raspberry Pi that's got a million buttons and knobs that you can twiddle to make the emulators go. It's just a navigable thing to play games. And I'm making a bunch of different retro consoles for the children in the family, so I'm on a tight schedule to get these done so I can wrap them and hand them out at Christmas.
You'll be very popular at Christmas.
Well,
yeah.
you can't get modern day consoles for love nor money at the moment, so I'm taking a lateral maneuver to get them games consoles for Christmas.
It's awesome. So they won't be ready for me to give them to my family. Then you're saying I'll have to wait until next Christmas before.
Well, they might be. They might be.
Okay.
They might be.
Okay.
I'll keep you appraised.
All right. Sounds good.
So,
Ellen, have you been doing any Advent of Code stuff or?
I did. I've been doing it. There's a tool that's kind of dark-like, but JavaScript based instead, called Nado.dev.
Okay.
By Paul Chen, who is actually an early Dark user. And so I've been doing that for fun. I haven't done today's yet. I did yesterday's.
Oh, okay, cool. Nado.dev is what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's like a fun time of year to just pick. My husband's been doing it in Rust because he doesn't usually do much Rust, which is what got me started thinking about it. But it's like a good time to start with another tool or just try something out.
Oh, that's super cool. All right. Well, maybe I will try to tune my Rust skills to the Advent challenges and see if I can do that. So that sounds great. All right, well, awesome. Well, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. It's always awesome chatting with you and having you on, and come back soon sometime. Anytime you want to come back and share something with us. And we didn't ask you to code today, but we do coding challenges sometimes. So maybe next time we can get you doing some live coding.
We'll see.
All right, well, great. Martin, anything else from your side?
Well, other than to reinforce the point that in our Discord channel, links in the URL above my head, Peter's going to be going through Rust in containers. What you were saying about, using the Rust container as your dev environment was interesting, because I spoke to Big Pod at the end of our live stream, off stream last week, and he was saying, I am making containers of all of my development environments, including debuggers, IDEs, web browsers preloaded with bookmarks to all of the online resources for the different languages. So he's got a number of large containers just packed with dev tools that he uses as his development environment. So those sort of, move around with him, which I thought was neat. Maybe that's something we should explore in a future stream. And next week, I think we're going to have a look at making the switch from Dockerfile to dockercompose.yaml. So I think that's the topic we'll be covering here this time next week.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Yeah, we have a couple examples on the blog of multi-container apps and how you could use Docker Compose to do that. And we will try doing a compose of the photo app too, though that might not be next week. That might wait until after the holidays because it's a little bit of a lift on my side. So awesome. Well, sounds good. Well, we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Ellen, thank you again for joining us. Ellen, where can people find you?
If you search my name, Ellen Chisa, I'm basically everywhere. You can email me. I'm ellen@boldstart.vc, or I'm most active on Twitter is @EllenChisa.
Awesome. Nice. You can find us at SlimDevOps. I'm at PSVANN. And Martin?
I'm at M_Wimpress on Twitter. And we are at SlimDevOps on Twitter. So if you've got questions or follow-up, then, feel free to tag us there.
Yeah, okay. Well, awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and we will catch up with you next week or tomorrow in the Discord.
Thanks very much for coming, everyone, and hopefully we'll speak to you very soon. Bye for now.